My daughter left for a business conference on Thursday morning, kissed my forehead, and told me not to worry about my grandson while she was gone. 40 minutes later, I heard him running down the hallway upstairs. My grandson has not been able to run, or walk, or stand since the day his kidneys failed 3 years ago. I dropped the glass of orange juice I was holding. It shattered across the tile, and I did not even look down. I am Walter Higgins. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a fire marshal for the city of Dayton, Ohio, investigating why buildings burned and who was responsible when they did. I know how to read a scene. I know how to tell the difference between an accident and something that was made to look like one. I thought I had already lived through the worst thing that could happen to my family. I was wrong. My grandson's name is Caleb. He is 16 years old. 3 years ago, his kidneys stopped working almost overnight. The doctors called it a rare autoimmune complication, something with a long Latin name I never bothered to fully understand because it didn't matter what it was called. What mattered was that my only daughter, Renee, quit her job as a paralegal to care for him full-time, and that I sold my little fishing cabin up on Indian Lake to help cover the specialized care Caleb needed after his own father, my son-in-law, walked out on both of them 2 months into the diagnosis. I never told Renee how much that cabin meant to me. A man doesn't say things like that out loud when his daughter needs him. For 3 years, Caleb has been on dialysis 3 times a week, tethered to machines, too weak most days to make it from his bed to the bathroom without someone's arm around him. Renee found him a specialist, a nephrologist named Dr. Colin Pruitt, who runs a private renal clinic on the north side of the city, the kind of place with soft lighting and a fish tank in the lobby and bills that make your stomach drop. Pruitt promised us an experimental treatment protocol, something involving a rotating series of infusions that the standard hospital system, in his words, simply wasn't equipped to offer. Renee believed every word of it. So did I, for longer than I want to admit. That Thursday morning, she'd told me she had a 2-day conference in Cincinnati for the medical supply company she now worked for part-time, a job Pruitt himself had apparently arranged for her, which should have told me something right there. She hugged Caleb goodbye in his wheelchair by the front door, told him to be good for Grandpa, and drove off in her silver minivan at exactly 7:15 in the morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee, savoring the quiet the way you do in a house that has held its breath for 3 straight years. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Fast ones. Coming from the 2nd floor, where Caleb's room is, where he has not climbed a single stair since the week he got sick. My hands went cold before my mind caught up with what my ears were telling me. I set down my mug and walked to the bottom of the staircase. And there he was, my grandson, 16 years old, standing at the top of the steps, gripping the railing, breathing like he'd just run a mile. His legs were shaking under him, but he was standing on them. He looked down at me, and I will never forget the expression on his face for as long as I live, because it was not joy. It was raw, animal fear. "Grandpa," he said, his voice cracking, "don't call Mom. Don't call anyone. We need to leave the house right now." I told him to stay put, that I was calling an ambulance, that this was a miracle and we needed doctors to see it immediately. He came down 2 steps toward me, faster than I thought his body could manage, and grabbed my wrist so hard his knuckles went white. "She's not in Cincinnati," he said. "Mom's not at any conference. Grandpa, please, we have to go." I stood there in my own front hallway, a grown man, a retired investigator who had walked into burning buildings without flinching, and I felt something colder than any fire I'd ever faced. "Caleb, what are you talking about? What's happening to you?" "There isn't time," he said. "Please, just trust me. Get your keys." My phone buzzed in my pocket before I could argue with him further. A notification from my bank. I looked at the screen with my thumb still trembling, and I read it twice because the first time didn't seem real. Unusual activity detected on your joint checking account. Access temporarily restricted pending verification. That account had my name on it. Renee had added me as a cosigner 2 years ago, back when we were pooling everything to pay Pruitt's bills. I had not made a single unusual transaction in my life. Someone had frozen it, and it hadn't been me. I looked up from the phone at my grandson, standing on legs the doctors swore would never hold his weight again, terrified out of his mind of the daughter I raised. Something in me, some old instinct built over 3 decades of walking into disasters, clicked into place. I stopped asking questions I didn't have time for. "Hold on to my shoulder," I told him. "We're going to the garage." We made it 2 steps into the garage before I realized my truck wouldn't start. Not a dead battery. I know the sound of a dead battery. This was something else. A dry click and nothing more, like the whole ignition system had simply given up existing. I popped the hood with hands that had gone steady the way they used to go steady at a fire scene, and I found the problem in under a minute. Someone had pulled the main ignition fuse clean out of the box and left the empty slot staring back at me like a missing tooth. Renee knew I never locked that garage door from the inside during the day. Renee knew exactly where the fuse box sat. My daughter, or somebody working for her, had made absolutely sure that if her son ever tried to run, he wouldn't get far. I felt something crack open in my chest that had nothing to do with fear anymore. It was fury, cold and focused, the kind I hadn't felt since the day I stood over a burned row house and realized the landlord had set the fire himself for the insurance money. There was an old riding mower trailer hitched to nothing in the corner, and beside it, under a moving blanket, sat my late wife's Buick, a car I hadn't driven in 4 years because I couldn't stand the smell of her perfume still clinging to the upholstery. The keys to that Buick were hanging on a hook inside the house, in the kitchen, and I did not have time to go back for them. I have never in my life broken into my own vehicle, but there is a first time for everything when your grandson is standing behind you shaking like a man walking to his own execution. I found a tire iron on the shelf, wrapped my jacket around my fist the way you learned to during rescue training, and put the back passenger window through with one clean strike. I reached in, popped the lock, and swept the glass off the seat before I half-carried Caleb into the car. Under the dash, wires. I hadn't hot-wired anything since I was 19 years old and testing my luck with my cousin's junker on a dirt road outside of town. But the body remembers what the mind forgets. I found the ignition harness, stripped 2 wires bare with my pocket knife, and touched them together until the old engine coughed, sputtered, and finally roared awake. I threw the Buick into reverse and hit the garage door opener clipped to the visor. The door groaned upward far too slowly for my liking. As I backed out onto the street, my headlights swept across a black SUV parked at the curb 3 houses down, engine idling, windows tinted so dark I couldn't see a silhouette inside. It hadn't been there the night before. It had no plates on the front bumper. I killed my headlights and drove the opposite direction, my heart hammering against my ribs like a man 20 years younger. We drove for almost 2 hours, mostly in silence, until I found a rundown motel off Route 4 with a flickering vacancy sign and a night clerk who didn't ask questions when I paid cash. I got Caleb settled onto one of the 2 beds, and I sat down across from him in the only chair in the room, my hands finally shaking now that the adrenaline had somewhere to go. "Talk to me, son," I said. "Tell me everything." Caleb looked down at his own hands, the same hands that used to hold a baseball glove before his body betrayed him, or before someone made his body betray him. I was starting to understand which one it actually was. "I've been able to walk for almost a year, Grandpa," he said quietly. I hid it. I had to. The number hit me like a fist to the sternum. A year, 12 months of watching him get wheeled to the dinner table, watching him wince through dialysis sessions, watching my daughter dab sweat from his forehead with such tender, exhausted devotion that I never once doubted her. A year of that, while my grandson could apparently stand on his own 2 feet the whole time. I started getting feeling back in my legs slow, real slow, he continued. First it was just pins and needles, then I could wiggle my toes. I told Mom right away. I was so excited. I thought the treatments were finally working. She told Dr. Pruitt the next time he came by. And? Caleb's jaw tightened. And every time I got a little better, they'd change my medication. New pills, twice a night. Mom called them my kidney stabilizers. She'd stand right there and watch me swallow them, every single time, like she was making sure. 20 minutes later, I couldn't think straight. My legs would go numb again by morning. It kept happening, over and over, every time I improved even a little. "Caleb," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "your kidneys actually failed. I saw the hospital records myself." "They did," he said, 3 years ago. "But Grandpa, I don't think they're still failing. I think whatever they've been giving me isn't treatment. I think it's poison." He rolled up his sleeve. Along the inside of his forearm, dozens of small, bruised puncture marks, some old and yellowed, some fresher, clustered in a pattern that had nothing to do with the dialysis port on his other arm. I sat there in that cheap motel room and felt every year of my career as an investigator screaming at me that I had missed the biggest fire of my life, burning slowly in my own family, for 3 straight years. I did not sleep that night. Somewhere around 2 a.m., while Caleb finally drifted off from pure exhaustion, I took out my laptop and did the only thing my training had ever really taught me to do under pressure. I started pulling threads. Renee thought freezing our joint checking account would leave me helpless. She underestimated the fact that a man who spends 3 decades documenting insurance fraud for a living tends to keep separate books. I had a small trust account from my wife's life insurance that Renee didn't know existed, set up quietly the year she passed, meant for emergencies. I logged in and confirmed it was untouched. Good. We would need it. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I logged into the shared family credit card portal using credentials I still had from helping Renee set up autopay years earlier. I pulled up the most recent charges, expecting hotel and conference fees from Cincinnati. There were none. Instead, at 9:40 that morning, a $540 charge appeared at a boutique spa and salon less than 15 minutes from our own house, followed by lunch at a steakhouse downtown, followed by a $2,000 charge at a jewelry store on 4th Street. My daughter was not at a medical conference. She was celebrating something, 20 minutes from the son she'd told the world was too sick to be left alone with anyone but her. I thought back to the early days after Caleb's diagnosis. How Renee had gone through 3 different home health aides in 6 months, firing each one for reasons that felt thinner every time I remembered them. The first one asked too many questions. The second one, she claimed, had been rough with him during transfers. The third simply made Caleb uncomfortable. Within half a year, Renee was the only person allowed in that boy's room besides Dr. Pruitt. I remembered too how she used to tell me gently, patronizingly, that I should leave the medical decisions to her and Pruitt. "You did your part raising me, Dad. Let me handle this. Your blood pressure doesn't need this stress." I had believed her because she was my daughter, and because grief makes fools of even careful men. I dug deeper into 3 years of bank statements I'd never had a reason to examine closely before. Buried among routine expenses, groceries, utilities, dialysis, copays was a recurring transfer, $22,000 a month, going out on the 3rd of every month to something called Pruitt Wellness Holdings, LLC. $22,000 a month for 36 months. I did the math sitting in that motel chair with my stomach turning to ice. Nearly $800,000. We did not have $800,000 sitting around. My late brother, Harold, had left Caleb a trust when he passed away 4 years ago, a modest inheritance from his years running a hardware store, meant to cover Caleb's education, nothing extravagant, roughly $900,000 when it was established. Renee had been named sole trustee, since I was, in her words, getting older, and she wanted to protect me from the burden. I logged into the trust portal using an old administrative password I'd insisted on keeping for myself when Harold first drew up the paperwork. The kind of quiet precaution a careful man makes and hopes never to need. The account balance loaded on my screen. $41,000 remained. Everything else, gone. Wired out over 3 years directly to Pruitt Wellness Holdings, LLC, disguised under line items like Advanced Renal Regeneration Protocol and Experimental Dialysis Alternative Therapy. My brother's entire legacy for his only nephew had been bled dry to fund something that was very clearly not medicine. I sat back in that cheap motel chair and understood, with total clarity, that my daughter had been paying a man to poison her own son for 3 years, and that I had personally handed over every dollar of my dead brother's trust to make it possible. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, I drove back toward our neighborhood, parking 3 streets over the way I used to park during undercover fire code stings, back before I retired. I knew Renee kept a small home office off the master bedroom, and I knew, from 31 years of reading people who thought they were being careful, that important things get hidden in obvious places, nobody bothers checking twice. I slipped in through the back sliding door, which she never remembered to fully latch, and made my way through the dark house I had helped pay the mortgage on. Her office door was locked. I still carried a small tension wrench and pick set in my old field kit from my investigator days, the kind of tool you keep for opening evidence lockers when someone loses a key, not for breaking into your own daughter's house. It took me under a minute. Behind a framed photograph of Caleb as a healthy 9-year-old, I found a small wall safe. No combination, but an old mechanical dial, the kind I'd cracked open dozens of times investigating arson cases where the owner claimed innocence but kept their real records hidden. I pressed my ear against the cool metal, turned slowly, and felt each tumbler drop into place the way muscle memory never really forgets. Inside, 4 unlabeled amber pill bottles, and a thick manila folder. I opened the folder first. Court petition forms, half filled out, requesting emergency guardianship of an incapacitated adult. My own name, typed in the blank. A supporting psychiatric evaluation. purportedly signed by a doctor I'd never met in my life, describing escalating dementia, paranoid ideation, and diminished capacity. They were not just poisoning Caleb, they were building a paper case to have me declared unfit, so that whatever assets I had left, my pension, my house, the small trust from my late wife, would fall directly under Renee's control the moment a judge signed off. I heard the front door open downstairs. Heavy, fast footsteps, not Renee's familiar tread. I killed my flashlight, grabbed the folder and the pill bottles, and folded myself into the narrow linen closet across the hall, leaving the door open just a crack. A man I did not recognize strode into the office moments later, mid-40s. Expensive suit rumpled like he'd been awake all night, sweat shining on his forehead under the hallway light. He tore through the desk drawers, cursing under his breath, clearly searching for the very folder now pressed against my chest in the dark. He pulled out his phone, hit speaker, and Renee's voice came through, sharp and irritated in a way I had genuinely never heard from my daughter before. "Colin, why is this taking so long? Did you get the guardianship documents? They're not where you said they'd be." The man Pruitt, it had to be Pruitt, snapped back. "I need those papers filed with the county clerk by Monday morning, or the whole timeline falls apart. They're right there on the desk, Colin. Stop panicking and look properly. We cannot afford mistakes right now." "I'm not panicking," he hissed, sweeping papers onto the floor. "I need this finalized. The second the judge signs off, Walter gets escorted out of that house permanently, and we finally have full access to what's left of his estate." My blood went cold and still in a way I've never experienced. Not even standing 3 feet from an active structure fire. Renee's voice shifted. And what came next stripped away any last fragment of doubt I was still foolishly clinging to. "Once my father's out of the picture, we need to deal with Caleb properly. He's been improving too fast lately. He mentioned his legs burning again this morning. He's building a tolerance." "I know," Pruitt said. "I noticed it during his last visit. We'll increase the dosage once your father's declared incompetent and there's nobody left watching. Double what we're giving him now should finish the job within a week. No more standing up on us. Just get the papers and get out of the house," Renee said. "Meet me at the hotel." The call ended. Pruitt turned, scanning the room one final time, and his eyes landed directly on the closet door. My hand closed around a heavy brass bookend on the shelf beside me, ready to swing if that door opened another inch. Then his phone rang again. Renee, panicked this time, warning him that the security company had flagged some kind of motion alert and he needed to leave immediately. He abandoned his search and bolted, and I heard the front door slam behind him less than a minute later. I stood in that closet in the dark for a long while afterward, shaking, before I finally trusted my legs to carry me back out through the sliding door and into the cold morning air. I did not drive back to the motel right away. I had one more stop, a chemistry lab 2 towns over, run by an old colleague from my fire investigation days named Arthur Kessling, who now did private toxicology work for insurance disputes. I'd helped Arthur get his lab licensed 15 years ago after a bureaucratic mess nearly shut him down before he opened. He owed me, and he never asked questions when I handed him $5,000 in cash and 4 unmarked pill bottles at 5 in the morning. "Give me until tonight," was all he said. From there, I drove to the home of Milton Reyes, the attorney who'd handled my late wife's estate and who still returned my calls even after I stopped needing his services regularly. I woke him up pounding on his front door before 6 in the morning, and I laid out everything on his kitchen table: the forged guardianship petition, the trust statements, the recording I'd made on my phone of the tail end of that conversation through the closet door. Milton went pale reading through it. "Walter, this is airtight, and it is terrifying. If she files this petition Monday morning before we counter it, you lose everything. Your rights, your accounts, your say in your own grandson's medical care. We cannot let her file first. Then we go after her first," I said. Milton spent the next several hours drafting emergency filings and placed a call to a detective he trusted in the county's financial crimes unit, a woman named Detective Ortiz who, it turned out, had been quietly building a fraud case against Pruitt Wellness Holdings for almost a year based on complaints from 2 other families. My daughter's name had never come up before. It was about to. By the time I made it back to the motel, Caleb was sitting bolt upright on the bed, terrified I'd been caught. I told him everything: the safe, the forged papers, the phone call, the plan to double his medication. I watched the last bit of childish hope drain out of his face, replaced by something harder and older than 16 has any right to look. "You walked yesterday, Caleb," I told him, gripping his shoulders. Tomorrow you're going to stand in that living room and watch this end, Arthur called that evening. His voice had none of its usual dry humor. Walter, I ran this 3 times because I didn't believe the first result. This isn't any kidney medication. This is a compounded neurotoxic agent, the kind occasionally misused in high-dose sedation cases completely unregulated for human use. Sustained exposure would absolutely mimic renal failure symptoms and cause exactly the kind of muscle weakness you're describing. Where in God's name did you get this? I thanked him and hung up, and I sat with that truth until it settled fully into my bones. My daughter had spent 3 years poisoning her own son to keep collecting on a dead man's trust fund and grooming a case to lock me away the moment the money ran dry. We spent Saturday and Sunday preparing. Detective Ortiz coordinated quietly with Milton, positioning officers nearby without tipping our hand. Sunday evening, right on schedule, Renee texted me. Wrapping up the conference early. Heading home now. Missed you both so much. See you soon. I typed back 3 words. We'll be home, and set the phone down. Caleb stood by our fireplace in a shirt I'd bought him that morning, off the tranquilizers for 3 full days now, his legs steadier with every passing hour. We waited in the dark living room, the curtains drawn, listening for the sound of her car. Headlights swept the driveway, the front door unlocked. Renee's voice called out sweetly into the darkened house, dripping with a tenderness I now understood had never once been real. Dad? Caleb? Honey? I brought Dr. Pruitt. He's just going to check on you. Don't be scared. She flipped on the light switch. Her purse hit the floor first. Then her whole face went slack with disbelief as she saw her son standing tall by the fireplace, no wheelchair in sight, staring back at her with cold, unblinking clarity. This is impossible, she whispered. You're sick. You need your medicine. I stopped taking your poison 3 days ago, Mom, Caleb said, his voice steadier than I'd heard it in 3 years. That's why I can stand. Renee's eyes darted to me, and for one heartbeat I watched her calculate. Watched the same performance she'd worn for 3 straight years try to reload itself. Dad, he's confused. He needs someone call an ambulance. He's having some kind of episode. We know everything, Renee, I said quietly, standing from my chair. The trust, the safe, Pruitt's real diagnosis. The recording of your phone call Thursday night. Her face drained white. Behind her, Milton stepped in from the kitchen doorway holding a folder of his own, and directly behind him came Detective Ortiz with 2 uniformed officers. Dr. Pruitt, standing frozen in the doorway, turned to run and made it exactly 4 steps before an officer had him against the wall. Renee tried one final time, dropping to her knees, sobbing that she'd only wanted to keep her family together, that she loved Caleb more than anything, that she never meant for it to go this far. I let her finish. Then I set the toxicology report and the forged guardianship petition on the coffee table in front of her, side by side with 3 years of wire transfer records to Pruitt Wellness Holdings. You didn't do this out of love, I told her. You did it because you were about to lose access to $800,000, and you needed a new source once that ran dry. You were going to have your own father declared insane to get it. She had nothing left to say to that. The officers led her out in handcuffs while she screamed things I won't repeat here. Things a daughter should never say to her own father, and I stood in my living room holding my grandson upright as the 2 of us watched the flashing lights fade down the street. I walked to the garage that same night, found the sledgehammer hanging on the wall, and I took Caleb's wheelchair apart piece by piece in our driveway until there was nothing left but twisted metal and torn fabric. It's over, I told him, breathing hard, my hands finally still. No, Grandpa, Caleb said, smiling for the first time in longer than either of us could remember. It's just starting. He was right. In the months that followed, Renee and Dr. Pruitt were both charged with conspiracy, attempted murder, and fraud in connection with a scheme that Detective Ortiz's investigation eventually revealed had already harmed 2 other families through Pruitt's clinic. They were convicted and sentenced to lengthy federal terms. Milton helped us recover what remained of Harold's trust through a civil suit against the bank that failed to flag years of suspicious transfers, and every recovered dollar went directly into an account solely in Caleb's name, protected this time by legal safeguards that no one person could ever quietly drain again. Caleb spent the following year in physical therapy, rebuilding muscles that had atrophied under years of poison, relearning how to trust his own body again. There were mornings he collapsed on the gym mats in frustration, and mornings he stood a little taller than the day before. I was there for every single one of them, the way I should have been paying closer attention all along, 6 months after that Sunday night, I drove him to his first day of his junior year. No wheelchair, just a slight favor in his left leg that the doctors say will likely fade with time. He got out of my truck, adjusted his backpack, and looked back at me with a steadiness in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a little boy. "Thanks for believing me, Grandpa," he said. Even when it didn't make any sense, I told him the truth, that when someone you love starts acting like a stranger, your gut usually knows before your head is willing to admit it. The lie only survives as long as nobody's brave enough to ask the hard question out loud. If you've ever had to protect the people you love from someone who was supposed to love them too, I'd like to hear about it, friend. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, and stay close to the ones who've earned your trust.